Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. We are back to estate planning of the rich and famous, where we chat about celebrities and their estate planning. Today's episode is on Kurt Cobain, the lead vocalist and guitarist in the iconic band Nirvana. I have you know that if I do a Legal Tea episode on a musician, just to get in in the vibe, I usually head to YouTube and listen to their songs, their music, as I write their episode. So yes, I'm currently listening to Nirvana, which is not my super preferred choice in music, but it's a change of pace nonetheless. And Smells Like Teen Spirit is playing. What a classic, right? Okay, so let's dive in. On Kurt's Wikipedia page, it shared that Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins referred to Kurt as the Michael Jordan of our generation. So yeah, Kurt is a pretty well-known guy for sure. So let's talk a little bit about Kurt as a person first, like his family, upbringing, wife, children, etc., before we dive into what happened estate-wise following his passing. According to his Wikipedia page, Kurt was born in Aberdeen, Washington on February 20th, 1967. When Kurt was a mere 9 years old, Kurt's parents divorced, and much later in life, Kurt shared that their divorce had a, quote, profound effect on his life, end quote. In fact, in an interview in 1993, he said he felt, quote, ashamed of his parents as a child and had desperately wanted to have a typical family. He wanted that security, so he resented his parents for quite a few years because of that, end quote. While in high school, he dropped out after realizing he did not have enough credits to graduate. And his mother at the time told him to 1, find a job, or 2, leave. And after 1 week, Kurt found his belongings packed in boxes. At that time, he began my dog's counter surf, not Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain couch surfing, and sometimes stayed at friends' houses, and even had bouts of homelessness living under a bridge. Fast forward a handful of years, that's when Kurt and Courtney Love met. Now, according to his Wikipedia, there's some discrepancy on when and how Kurt and Courtney met, but nonetheless, they met and ended up getting married. Then, in 1992, they had a child, a little girl named Frances Cobain. There were questions about Courtney's drug use, both before and during the pregnancy. And on the topic of drug use, many associate Kurt with his drug use and abuse. And in addition to that, Kurt experienced some mental health issues that I think are really important to note. He was struggling. Ultimately, after breaking out, literally escaping, when I say breaking out, a detox recovery program facility, he went MIA. He went missing in action and was later located a few days later on April 8th, dead at his home. He died by suicide. It was uncovered following his passing that he very likely died a few days prior, and that's why his reported date of death is actually April 5th, 1994. So after his passing, much estate-wise stuff happened. So let's dive in. Just to give you some insight in terms of numbers and estate value, according to Daily Express newspaper, Kurt's estate was approximately worth $450 million, and it was further estimated that his estate would earn approximately $4.4 million per year from album sales. So yeah, we're not talking about a little money here. Estate planning wise, should I do a drum roll? If you remember, on our last estate planning of the Rich and Famous episode, we had Miss Betty White, who clearly, if you listen to that episode, had excellent estate planning. 5 months have passed since Betty's passing, and it is still crickets, which is a good thing in my world, because when things are not plastered all over the news, that's usually good because it means their estate affairs are private. Well, Kurt was the opposite. Unfortunately, a lot is known about Kurt's estate. The messy family, bandmate stuff, and who got what, all because Kurt did not do any estate planning. You heard me correctly. He did no estate planning, no will, no trust, nothing. What that means is Kurt's estate passed to people, to beneficiaries by the intestate laws. These fancy named laws are a kind of a built-in estate plan for individuals that do not do any estate planning. The good news, if we're looking for some, the good news is his estate passed to his wife Courtney and to his daughter Frances. But the bad news? Well, that it got passed to Courtney, who following Kurt's passing had legal troubles involving battery and assault and even drug issues. And actually, according to Courtney's Wikipedia page, she said a handful of years after the 1994-1995 timeframe when Kurt passed away, that she, quote, had little memory of 1994-1995, as she had been using large quantities of heroin at the time, end quote. And even bad news relating to Frances, the daughter. It was bad news because she was a mere 20 months old when Kurt passed away. A solid estate plan could have protected Courtney, arguably from herself, and Frances as a teeny tiny minor child. So when people pass away without an estate plan, it's sometimes like a circus. And that's probably an accurate description as to what happened with Kurt's estate following his passing. It just all seems very random and messy and all over the place. Not only is there not a set plan as to who gets what and how, but there's not even a set person that should be named as the estate's representative. Like, he didn't, through a document, appoint like an executor, a personal representative, a trustee. For that reason, even though Courtney had well-documented struggles with drugs and mental health and just general instability, Courtney was left in charge, according to a Trust Council article. Once Courtney became in charge of things, a few incidents happened that left many people scratching their heads, like, what is going on? What is Courtney doing? First, a few years after his death, specifically in 1997, Courtney and a few of the former Nirvana bandmates actually created an LLC to manage Nirvana-related projects, according to an article by Daniel and Andy Mayores, attorneys out of Michigan. Well, that sounds like a good idea, right? Well, the night before the release of 45 recordings, Courtney filed a lawsuit to dissolve the LLC. Her reason, I'm sure you're asking? Well, she said the LLC should be dissolved because Courtney received, quote, bad advice when setting it up. And she claimed that Kurt was the band and his bandmates were just sidemen. And those sidemen countersued Courtney, questioning her mental state and requested she be removed from the LLC due to incapacity. And according to the attorneys Danielle and Andy, the fighting did not end until 2002 when the parties finally settled. A second thing that happened, something somewhat strange, occurred in 2004. Courtney alleged that many individuals like banks, lawyers, accountants, former assistants, etc., managing Kurt's estate had stolen $30 million in cash and a whopping $500 million in real estate holdings. And Courtney actually hired a lawyer to go after these individuals. However, still according to that article by attorneys Danielle and Andy, that never came to fruition. And all the articles I read didn't really say why, but nonetheless, that it fizzled. Though I did see that Courtney bashed that lawyer that she hired. She bashed the lawyer on Twitter by accusing that lawyer of being bought out by those individuals. And after that strange allegation by Courtney, that lawyer actually turned around and sued Courtney for libel. And side note, just in case if you're wondering, the lawyer actually lost. Courtney won on the basis that while the accusations were untrue, the court claimed that Courtney did not knowingly make a false statement, which is an element to be satisfied in proving libel. What drama! One prevalent theme I saw throughout my research was the up and down relationship between Courtney and her and Kurt's daughter, Frances. For example, in 2009, Frances actually filed for a restraining order against Courtney. And actually, at some point, according to the article by attorneys Danielle and Andy, Courtney lost custody over Frances, as well as managing Frances's inheritance from Kurt's estate. Though, according to an article from 2019 in People magazine, Frances did sort of do a tell-all interview and explained that her and her mother's relationship is back on track. She shared, quote, "I am somebody who only wants to provide the role for her, as somebody who loves her and supports her and has a non-judgmental perspective of empathy and compassion that maybe nobody else in her life has. She's a really good person. This is what I like to call the era of balance, and I hope that we're bringing in the era of balance here." End quote. If you have a chance to check out the People magazine article, you should. You can tell that Frances has really grown up and matured. She even discusses how it felt to be inheriting all of this money that, in her words, she didn't earn. It's really a just fascinating insight from someone so near this situation. As we begin to wrap this episode up, I think there are two things to learn from Kurt's estate. First, well, this probably goes without being said, but what's our hashtag around here, Legal Tea Land? Hashtag do your estate plan. All of this gobbledygook did not have to happen, but it did because he completely failed to do any planning. He could have picked who was in charge. He could have picked how people inherited, but he didn't, and a mess ensued. Second, the way he left things could have permanently ruined the mother-daughter relationship between Courtney and Frances. It started off, following Kurt's passing, quite sour. Thankfully, they were able to work through a lot and learn to reestablish the relationship. It's so sad that estate planning, or lack thereof, has that depth of impact on personal relationships. But it does. I see it all the time. I'm sure you have too. As we all know, when money lands on the table, people act different. Sometimes it's not even the money aspect, but the emotional aspect of losing someone. When we lose someone, our emotions are on overdrive, right? I've seen where an emotionally driven person, following the loss of a loved one, is making decisions based on emotions rather than facts. I know this sounds silly, but I've heard where the kids, the beneficiaries, will bring up things that happened in their childhood. Like, you were always mom's favorite, or my brother stole my middle school girlfriend and I've never trusted him since. These things sound silly, but these raw times bring these emotions out. And unfortunately, these emotions oftentimes cause rifts and fights in my estate world. Having an estate plan takes the guesswork out of things. There will still be emotion, sure, but having a plan means there's a designated person in charge, and that person merely has to follow the directions of the plan. Compare that to not having a plan, someone having to step up as the person in charge, everyone agreeing to have that person be the one in charge, yes, everyone having to agree, and then sort of blindly following the intestacy statutes. Remember, those are the laws for people that passed away without an estate plan. And with all that guesswork, it's ripe for family disagreements that could ultimately lead to estate litigation. Okay, let's wrap this episode up. Next week, we're back to a cautionary tale episode where we talk about real-life clients and real-life cases, not celebrity-level cases. During that episode, we're going to be talking about mistakes I see often when people are trying to pre-plan for Medicaid. And before we dive into that, we're going to do a little review of Medicaid versus Medicare. So yeah, tune in for that next Tuesday, Legal Tea listeners. Until then, take care and be well.